Welcome to Movies. Today we are discussing the 1927 film Metropolis. The film's complex and challenging production, including the use of special effects and significant influence on modern science fiction cinema. The film's mixed reception, with some critics praising its visual splendor and ambition, while others finding its story simplistic with a heavy-handed political message. We also discuss its subsequent restorations, including the 2010 discovery of a damaged print of the original cut in Argentina.
Buckle up, because we are diving deep into Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Ooh, excellent choice.
You know, our listeners clearly have a thing for this 1927 silent film, and we're not just talking robots and visuals, although that Maschinenmensch is, let's be real, seriously cool. But we're going full-on archaeologists here, digging into all the layers of this cinematic masterpiece.
I love that, like peeling back time to see what makes it tick.
Exactly. And thankfully, you came prepared with, like, articles and production notes.
Oh, absolutely.
Even some old reviews, which I'm really interested in.
Yes, the then versus now perspective.
Exactly. So, to start our digging, where do we even begin with a film as intricate and influential as Metropolis?
Well, I think a good place to start is, with Lang himself.
Yeah.
Did you know that the entire vision for Metropolis was kind of sparked by a trip he took to New York City back in 1924?
No way. So you're telling me that the city that never sleeps inspired a dystopian nightmare?
Well, it wasn't so much about replicating New York as it was capturing a certain feeling.
Okay.
Lang was just blown away by those skyscrapers, calling them vertical sails against the night sky.
Wow.
That sense of awe, but also kind of that underlying darkness, that potential danger lurking within such massive growth, technological growth. I mean, that's really what he wanted to bottle up and explore in Metropolis.
It really makes you wonder, what will people a century from now see when they look at our cities?
Right.
Like, what will our legacy be? But before we go too far into the future.
Yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, let's rewind back to Metropolis. Okay, the visual style, even after all these years, it's mind-blowing.
Oh, it's a feast for the eyes, absolutely.
It is.
But, Lang wasn't going for straight realism here. He really wanted to create a world that was both futuristic and timeless at the same time. So you've got those sleek Art Deco elements, which of course was cutting edge back then.
Yeah.
But then he blends it with like these Gothic cathedral vibes, industrial machinery, you name it.
There's a little bit of everything.
It's a visual representation of the societal layers and tensions at play, those stark contrasts between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, because you have the elites literally living above everybody else, right? And then the workers are toiling away underground.
Exactly. The design just reinforces those themes beautifully, wouldn't you say?
And the effort it must have taken to create that world, it's incredible. I mean, from what I understand, they were using some pretty groundbreaking special effects.
Oh, absolutely. Lang was like obsessed with pushing the boundaries of what was possible on film.
I read about that.
They used this thing called the shift-hand process, which basically used mirrors to create these really convincing illusions, blending actors into miniature sets, things like that.
That's amazing. And this was back in the 20s?
Oh, yeah. It was incredibly sophisticated for the time, and it really paved the way for so much of the cinematic innovation that came later.
That's really cool.
Even Hitchcock used variations of the shift-hand process in his films.
Oh, wow. Talk about a legacy. But I can only imagine, with all that innovation, it couldn't have been easy on the actors.
Oh, those actors definitely earned their on-screen glory, let me tell you.
Yeah.
We're talking like grueling hours in these really uncomfortable costumes and sets.
I can imagine.
But, Brigitte Helm, who played both Maria and the iconic robot,
right,
she really endured the brunt of it.
I bet.
I mean, can you imagine wearing that rigid metal robot costume for hours on end? Or being submerged in like freezing water for days during the filming of the Worker City flood.
Oh my gosh, I read about that they actually flooded a set.
Oh yeah, Lang was a stickler for realism.
Wow.
He really wanted to capture the rawness and the visceral impact of that scene.
That's incredible, but I can't even imagine what that must have been like for the actors.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer to the film, doesn't it? Knowing the physical challenges that they overcame.
It does. Speaking of Maria and the robot, because it's hard to talk about Metropolis without picturing that Maschinenmensch.
It's iconic.
It's everywhere, on posters and t-shirts, everything. But for someone who's only seen, like, those images, what really lies at the heart of this film.
Right.
Because it's more than just robot.
Yeah, well, you are spot on. While the robot is like this incredibly powerful visual, Metropolis is really about something much deeper, something much more profound.
Okay.
At its core, it's a story about unchecked industrialization.
Okay.
And the growing chasm between the thinkers and the workers, the head and the hands that they're referred to. But their hubris, their lack of unity, ultimately leads to their downfall.
Yeah.
And Lang is using that allegory to highlight the dangers of societal division, when we pursue progress at all costs, without considering the human cost.
Wow.
It's a powerful message, don't you think?
It is, and it's something that we're still dealing with today, centuries later.
Absolutely.
That balance of progress and humanity.
It's a timeless theme, for sure.
It really makes you think, are we building our own Tower of Babel right now, and we just don't even realize it?
Right. It's a question worth asking ourselves.
It is.
And it's something that Lang explores through these really fascinating, complex characters. You've got Joff Fredersen, the master of the city.
Right, the mastermind behind it all.
Right, but he's so focused on maintaining control, on keeping those gears turning, that he's become, emotionally detached from not just the workers, but even his own son, Frater.
Yeah, because Frater's almost like our way into that world, right? He's kind of oblivious at first to what's really going on.
He represents that potential for empathy, that bridge between the head and the hands.
Right.
That Metropolis ultimately argues for.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you've got Rotwang, the inventor.
Right, and he is a complex character.
Oh, tell me about it.
Like, where do his motivations even stem from? Is it just like ambition? Is it something darker?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because Rotwang represents this double-edged sword of technological advancement. I mean, he's obviously a genius, but his brilliance it's overshadowed by this really dark past, this desire for revenge.
Oh, interesting.
He sees the Maschinenmensch, the robot, as a way to kind of reclaim what he's lost. Even if it means hurting others in the process.
It's that classic cautionary tale, right? Technology in the wrong hands can be just as destructive as it is, innovative and creative.
Absolutely.
It's really fascinating. And speaking of different interpretations, Metropolis was made during a very specific time in history, right? Germany, between the world wars, talk about a turbulent time.
Oh, absolutely.
So how did that historical context influence how people viewed the film?
Well, you can't underestimate that historical backdrop, right? I mean, Metropolis premiered in 1927, a time of immense social and political upheaval in Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, World War I was still fresh in everyone's minds.
Of course.
And you had these seeds of fascism starting to take root.
Wow.
So when people sat down in the theater to watch Metropolis, they saw their anxieties, their hopes, their fears reflected back at them on that big screen.
It's like a Rorschach test almost?
Yeah, exactly. Some people saw it as this pro-worker allegory.
Which makes sense,
right,
given the stark contrast between the workers and the wealthy.
Exactly. A call for unity and solidarity.
Right.
But then, of course, you had others who saw it as this warning against social unrest.
Oh, interesting.
A cautionary tale about what happens when you disrupt the established order.
Right.
And even years later, the Nazis, they found elements of Metropolis compelling.
No way, really?
Oh, yeah. Although Lang himself, he absolutely rejected their interpretation.
Of course.
But it just goes to show, right?
Yeah.
How this film, it had this power to provoke, to get people talking. And really, that's a testament to its enduring legacy, right? The fact that we're still talking about it, debating its meanings almost a century later.
It's a film that just keeps on giving.
It really does. Okay,
before we delve further into its legacy, because I know it's had quite the journey.
Oh, yeah.
I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, just the sheer scale of the production.
Right.
Because it's one thing to, read about it, but to imagine those actors, those sets, the logistics, it boggles the mind. Like, what were some of the details from your research that really brought that home for you?
One detail that always sticks with me is the filming of the worker city flood.
Oh, right.
Because Lang, he was such a stickler for realism.
He wanted to get it right.
He wanted to get it right, so they built this massive, massive tank on the studio lot, and I'm talking massive, and they filled it with water.
Okay.
Ice cold water.
Oh my God.
And they had hundreds of extras, many of them children, submerged in this frigid water for days on end just to get the shots.
Oh my goodness. That's both impressive and horrifying.
Right.
At the same
It
time.
really gives you a sense of the conditions they were working under.
Wow, it really does. And it makes you appreciate their dedication even more, knowing what they went through.
Absolutely.
It adds this whole other layer of meaning to the film.
It does. It does.
Wow. And speaking of, layers of meaning and interpretations, we've talked about how we see it today, but what was the initial critical reception like back in 1927?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Was it universally praised? Was it controversial?
It's actually really fascinating to revisit those old reviews because it wasn't all, glowing praise.
Really?
Yeah, some critics, they found the plot a little convoluted.
Okay.
The characters a little too symbolic. H.G. Wells,
Oh, wow.
the science fiction author,
Yeah.
he actually called the politics in the film ludicrously simplistic.
Oh, he did not hold back.
No, he did not mince words. But even in his criticism, you can sense this grudging respect,
Yeah.
He compared it to Frankenstein, to his own novel, The Sleeper Awakes.
Wow.
So he clearly saw it as part of this lineage of stories grappling with technology and its consequences.
So it's almost like those negative reviews, they tell us just as much as the positive ones,
Oh, absolutely. They provide this fascinating snapshot of how the film was perceived in its own time.
Right.
And it's so interesting to see how those perceptions have evolved over the years.
It really is. And despite those mixed reviews, there's no denying that Metropolis struck a chord.
It definitely did.
I mean, we're still talking about today.
Exactly. And that brings us to its really fascinating legacy, which, ironically enough, involves its own share of twists and turns and even reimagining.
Reboots and remakes and kind of.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about Metropolis's creation, its themes, how those resonated back in the day. But this film has had quite a journey, right? Like, it's not like you could just, stream it back then.
That's true. The film has had a very interesting afterlife.
It has.
Remember those different interpretations we talked about?
Right.
Well, the Metropolis we know and love today, it's not even the same Metropolis that premiered back in 1927.
What do you mean?
So the original cut of the film, it was considered lost for decades.
Well, what audiences were watching for years, these were heavily edited versions.
Oh, no.
Missing crucial scenes, plot points. Like, imagine watching a puzzle with, half the pieces missing.
That's got to be frustrating if you're trying to, fully grasp the film.
It was. And it's no wonder there were so many different takes on the film's meaning, right?
Right.
Because people were working with incomplete information. But then, and this is like something out of a movie itself.
Okay.
These lost prints, they started surfacing.
What? How?
One turned up in an Argentine museum back in 2008.
Really?
Another one in New Zealand.
Get out of here.
It was like this giant cinematic jigsaw puzzle being pieced together bit by bit.
So, how did finding these missing scenes, how did they change our understanding of Metropolis?
They added so much depth and nuance.
Yeah.
For example, the character of Josephi, Schrader's friend.
Okay, yeah.
Who's initially, very loyal to Joff Ederson.
Right.
We see so much more of his internal conflict in these rediscovered scenes, his growing awareness of the workers' plight, things that were basically absent before.
So it's not even just restoring the footage, it's restoring the story.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's like we're finally seeing the film as Lang intended it, warts and all. And that brings us to one of the most, let's say, debated chapters in Metropolis's history.
Okay.
The 1984 restoration by Giorgio Moroder.
Ah, yes. The Moroder Metropolis.
Yeah.
I'm a child of the 80s, so that synth-heavy soundtrack, it has a certain nostalgic appeal to me.
I can imagine.
But I can also see how it would be a little controversial.
Extremely controversial. I mean, imagine taking this silent film classic and slapping on this modern rock score featuring artists like Queen and Freddie Mercury.
Right.
I mean, some people loved it. They saw it as a way to introduce this classic to a whole new generation.
Which, I mean, that's a valid point.
It is.
Art shouldn't exist in a vacuum. It should evolve.
Exactly.
But then there were others who felt like it was almost sacrilegious,
Of course.
Like it detracted from the power of the original silent film, the way Lang intended it.
Right, and it really ignited this whole debate about artistic license and restorations, a debate that's still going on today,
Yeah.
Like, where do you draw the line between preservation and reinterpretation?
Right. Is there a right way to experience a work of art? Or is it okay to adapt it, reinterpret it?
Big questions.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, like how they're constantly reimagining Shakespeare, for example, like on stage and in film, Is there a right way to do Hamlet?
Right. But you've hit on something really important here, which is that art shouldn't be static, right? No. It should spark conversation. It should challenge us, provoke us even.
Yeah.
And in a way, the Moroder Metropolis, for all its controversy, it did that.
It did. It got people talking about Metropolis, about film preservation, about the role of music in film.
Exactly. It's almost like, this happy accident, because it brought this film back into the conversation in a really big way.
Right. It made people want to revisit it.
Yeah, exactly.
And thankfully now we have that 2010 restoration that you mentioned, which I think a lot of people consider to be the most complete version of Lang's vision.
Well, as close as we're going to get, I think.
Yeah. Which is amazing that we have that so that we can really appreciate, both the historical artifact and how it's influenced artists today.
Yeah, because its DNA is everywhere. Even if people don't realize it. I mean, I can't even hear Queen's Radio Gaga without picturing those synchronized workers' movements from Metropolis.
Yeah, it's so iconic.
It is.
Or, like the influence you see on someone like Janelle Monáe's concept albums, which are also exploring these really complex themes of, technology and identity.
Right.
Social justice, all through this really cool kind of futuristic lens.
Absolutely.
Like Metropolis's fingerprints are all over the place.
They are.
It's true.
It's a film that just keeps on giving.
It really does. So as we wrap up our deep dive on Metropolis, what is like the one thing that you really hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
That's a big question.
It is a big question.
I think for me, Metropolis, it's not just a film. It's a conversation starter.
Okay.
It's this really stark and frankly still relevant reminder of the power of technology.
Of course.
And the potential dangers of it.
Yeah.
It's about, the importance of empathy in a world that's becoming increasingly mechanized and dehumanized. Right. And I think most importantly, it's a film about the need to bridge those divides, those societal divides that threaten to tear us apart.
Because if we don't, we end up with that Tower of Babel situation.
Exactly.
And nobody wants that.
No.
Well said. And maybe, just maybe, this film, it'll inspire us all to kind of look at our own Metropolis.
Right.
The cities we live in, the systems we create, the relationships that we build, and ask ourselves, are we really creating a world that values human connection?
Right.
Or are we just drifting further and further apart?
Now, that is a question worth pondering.
It is. It really is. Well, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me and for sharing your incredible insights, as always.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Welcome to Science. Welcome To is dedicated to exploring new technology to create informative and entertaining media. If you would like to create a podcast like this, be sure to visit Google Notebook LM. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe for more. Leave a comment if you have an idea for an episode that we should start researching. Thank you for listening.